Welcome to Elevated Practice, where we interview masters and mavericks within the field of holistic medicine and uncover unconventional stories in the field of health and wellness. I'm your host, Gretchen, and every episode I'll be interviewing clinicians, scholars, entrepreneurs, and educators who share their wisdom and ideas with you. Are you ready to elevate your practice? Let's begin today's episode. I'd like to extend a big thank you to Handcraft Health for sponsoring Elevated Practice and empowering integrative healthcare practitioners to create personalized healthcare packages for their patients. Create a free account today and elevate your practice at www.handcraft.health. And now, on to today's episode. Hello, I am here with Dr. Ed Neal. Dr. Neal is a renowned doctor bridging ancient wisdom with modern practice. He developed the research methodology classical text archaeology, and he is the visionary behind Nei Jing, nature-based medicine. With over 40 years of experience studying and practicing medicine and over 20 years studying the Yellow Emperor's Inner Classic, Dr. Neal offers a unique approach that integrates the profound wisdom of the Huangdi Nei Jing with the realities of modern clinical practice. Dr. Neal began his career in medicine in 1981, and after completing med school and an internal medicine specialty training, he did postgraduate studies in Switzerland and began studying Chinese medicine in Italy. He studied Chinese medicine and language both in the States and abroad in China, and has been a professor in multiple schools of Western medicine, integrative medicine, and East Asian medicine. He serves as a consultant to the World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland, on issues of traditional medicine. Dr. Neal has founded and serves as the medical director for the Apricot Grove to advance Nei Jing nature-based medicine and the director of the nonprofit Xiling Institute. These organizations study traditional forms of medical knowledge to identify innovative solutions to modern global challenges. Dr. Ed Neal, welcome.
Hi, Gretchen. It's a great pleasure to be with you today.
I am so happy to have you here. To our listeners, I just recently had the honor of meeting Dr. Neal through a mutual colleague, and I instantly wanted to interview him to share his application of nature-based medicine and the Nei Jing with our listeners. Myself, being a practitioner who found my way to Chinese medical school through graduate studies in Eastern philosophy and spirituality, Dr. Neal, your return to the Nei Jing and your emphasis on textual understanding and the ancient overarching stories that connect the macrocosm of the body and the macrocosm of our planet and nature really resonated with me. I am so excited to hear everything you would like to talk to our listeners about today.
Whatever you would like.
Thank you. I was wondering if maybe we could start with how you found your way to conventional medical school and then transitioned to studying East Asian philosophy, studying Chinese medicine, and then how you developed your passion for the Nei Jing. Let's start there.
Okay, that sounds great. When people ask, how did you start doing this? Or, why did you start doing that? There's always several layers of answers, right? And the deeper layer is the current of the river of your life. That you were born at a certain time in a certain way, and the rivers of your life flow towards something, right? And then there's the story, like something happened and I got sick and then I decided I want to be a doctor. That's kind of the over story. So in a certain way, everything that happens is because of the rivers of our life. They take us there. My dad was a doctor. Like many healers, I grew up in a family that was having difficulties and wanted to be a healing presence in that. I think a lot of healthcare people are like that. That's all kind of a normal course of events. And then I went into medical school and graduated from medical school and did my internship. And I was going to be a surgical intensive care researcher. So I was,
that sounds intense.
I was set up in a training program to study anesthesia and critical care. And I was then going to go into academics and study intensive care medicine. But before I did that, I did a training in primary care internal medicine, which was about 3 years. And when I finished that, I knew I would lose my skills if I didn't do a year of practice. So I decided to take a year off and be a primary care doctor to get my skills good before I went on to do that training down in San Diego in critical care. And I started to treat people. I had a practice in the hospital, and I also had several jobs. I worked in a refugee health clinic and a migrant health clinic. And there was two things that happened. One was in my hospital practice, I began to see that my patients divided themselves into two groups. And the first group were people for whom I had a solution that they could come in and I could do something. Like they broke their arm, they needed stitches, they needed antibiotics for strep throat, whatever. Those people I would treat, and then I would never see them again, essentially, or I'd see them in a year or 6 months. Then there were the people for whom what I was offering wasn't doing anything. They were fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, all those kinds of things we all know about. And I would begin to see those people every week because they'd come back and tell me this ain't working. At the same time, I was working in the refugee health clinic and the migrant health clinic. Really enjoyed that. The patient population was wonderful, really interesting people. They had such interesting stories, and they didn't really feel Western medicine. So we prescribe medicine, and often they would not take it. And when you describe something, they nod their head, but not really. At the same time, I was living here in Portland, and I knew a man named Subhuti Dharmananda, who probably many people know of, who started the Institute for Traditional Medicine. And I was talking to him, and he was saying, well, why don't you take this book? It's called A Bag of Pearls. It's about his formulas. And here's a box of formulas, and just go see what happens. So I took them off to my refugee health clinic, and I would look up in the book, headache and my ear itches. Okay, here, take this. And it worked. And they just loved that kind of approach and that it was herbal and so forth. And it really spoke to them. At the same time, back in the hospital, I was trying to think, well, what can I do for these people that see me every week? Clearly what I have isn't working. So I started to wonder whether looking in another system might help. Because obviously, if we had the answers in Western medicine, we'd be using them. But we didn't. So I started thinking where to look. And I decided I'd look in a medical tradition that was over 200 years old, thinking you can make a bad mistake for 100 years, but people aren't going to do it for 200 years. That there's something of value there. And also that there was a written tradition. And so two things came up, India and China, two places really. And I had more of an affinity. My river flowed more towards China. Mm-hmm. So I went to study Chinese medicine. And then I just got more and more interested in that. And I thought the world's full of internists and, they don't need one more, or a surgical intensive care researcher. That would be fun too. But I started to study Chinese medicine. I went off to study with Dr. Cinolini, who lived in Italy, was a great Italian acupuncturist. And I loved going over there and studying with her. And she thought acupuncture was a very serious medicine. It should only be taught to physicians. Mm-hmm. That was her point of view. So it was only a small group of us, but she was a great teacher. I've come to have a different point of view on that. But she was a great teacher, and I studied. And over time, in the beginning, I was doing internal medicine and Chinese medicine. And then I just said, well, there's already a bunch of internists. I'm just going to go to Chinese medicine. And I went back to school and studied Chinese medicine and started studying Chinese language. And the teachers that I found in China, the people I respected, they all knew the classics very well. So I knew this is something for me. I have to do it. And this was coexistent with another thing that was happening. When I was started in Chinese medicine, I loved it. I loved the people, the stories, the experiences, the treatments. But I knew right away something was not quite right. And that was comparing my experience with what I'd just gone through in medical training. So in medical training, I just had 7 or 8 years of training, nonstop. I didn't know everything in the world, but I felt like I knew why I did what I did. And I felt pretty competent in that, like where it came from and so forth. And in Chinese medicine, I could see right away, this is a protocol system, and I don't really understand what I'm doing. And not only that, when I talk to different people, I'm not sure if they do too, because I'll ask one teacher one thing, get one answer, go to another, get another. And there's just this kind of feeling like, I don't really understand what I'm doing. I'm following the instructions, it's working, but when it doesn't work, I don't really know what to do. And I don't know why it is working. And that was deeply unsettling to me. So that was another reason I went back to study the classics, because I wanted to bridge this unease between what I knew as a physician and what I was practicing. So that's how I got there.
So you wanted to get deeper to the origins of the medicine as opposed to other practitioners who maybe were branching off and doing different parts in different areas, which from an outside point of view looked like they were having different treatments, but not understanding where the root came from?
Yeah. First of all, I want to say this. When I say like one teacher said one thing and one teacher said another, or that practitioners sometimes treat from the branch, don't know the root, and so forth, that is not a criticism. Because what I find in Chinese medicine, it's full of people with good intentions who work really hard to learn what they can. And I see it more as the limitations of our training and what knowledge has been available. In Chinese medicine schools, you work there full of people who are very dedicated, not well paid, really doing great work and heartfelt teaching. So I don't mean to say they weren't doing it right. It's more, I think, what's available to us and where we start from, what our teaching was.
Well, and certainly when you have a 2,000-year-old medicine, there is going to be so much to learn and so much diversity in terms of how people follow particular paths to treat. So there is so much out there. But to go back to the root and say, okay, where did all of this start? Where did all of these different ideas originate? And it sounds like you were a scholar, a researcher, you were a textualist without knowing it right from the beginning.
It was just for my own personal peace. I didn't want to practice this beautiful medicine as
Yeah.
a protocol-based practitioner, because
Yeah.
didn't satisfy me,
Yeah.
especially having the experience of being a medical physician. And so I went back to study. But originally, I just thought it would be, studying for myself and to inform my practice. There's a tradition of physician scholarship in Chinese medicine. The people who go to work in the day, treat a lot of people, come home and study the classics at night, and keep expanding their knowledge and kind of weaving those two things back and forth. And I wanted to be one of those people, not just following the instructions.
So, how did you start off then? You taught yourself and you learned the Chinese language, and then you just started reading? Is that how
Yeah,
it
I did.
happened?
I did teach myself. I went back to university and studied Chinese, and then I went to China and studied Chinese languages. I did because I did see language was going to be the key, and that's true. Like the key to Chinese medicine is through language, and if you're not in that process somehow with a teacher or by yourself, then it's like you're standing outside the theater listening to how the play was.
Mm.
You're not really participating because it's all there in language. So that's the key. So I started studying the language. And then there was this one thing that happened, which changed everything, was just in the late 80s, most early Chinese texts were put on databases. And that was revolutionary. It was something very new. Because in the old days, you had to memorize it forward and
Mm.
backwards, which is how people used to do it, to be able to like make associations and do research on it. But just when I started, it all was put on databases. First, I was working with a database from Hong Kong. It was through our school. And that meant I could take a character, for example, and put it into the database, and in a second see all of its instances, and then begin to translate all of its instances, not only of the Nei Jing, but also of all early texts, essentially, or like most of them. And then rebuilding a meaning. There's the modern meaning, but that doesn't actually work in all these places. So what's a different definition that works? And that became what's now known as text archaeology.
Ah.
So, and right away, I could see this was a whole different world. They were talking about something very different. And that was very strange to me because it's right out there in plain sight. For example, the first one, which is now so clear, is that the descriptions of the channels we have were originally a very sophisticated description of the three-dimensional vascular system. And that's like so super clear now. But at the time, I was like, can that be true? But I keep rereading the passages and seem to be saying that. And for 5 years, I didn't mention that to anyone, because I was sure that there was something I was missing. And why didn't someone else say this? And I remember the day I went to a conference, a medical conference, and I got up in front of people and said that, and I got down and I was just shaking. That was like, oh my gosh, that's so big. But that's just one example that the world of the original writings is so different, and it's tied to the spirit and the technical aspects of nature. It's not just like, we're like nature. It's very technical and detailed, and the anatomy's very sophisticated, and they're tying all these patterns together of stars, moons, planets, what's going on under the earth, 60-year cycles, all these kinds of things, and your anatomy, which is off the chart complex and like centuries ahead of what we knew in the West. Like Harvey wrote his De Motu Cordis, the movement of blood, in 1628. That's when we first knew that the heart moved the blood around. At that time, the prevailing theory was that you ate food, it turned into blood, and then your body ate the blood, and it was all stored in your liver, essentially. So that's where we were in 1628. 300 years BCE, or whenever the Nei Jing was written, their descriptions were off the chart accurate. And they know things that we're still grappling with today. Like, the heart doesn't actually pump all the blood around. The numbers don't add up. The lungs are important in that. So there's these things where they're actually still ahead of us. And so that was just mind-boggling. And to me, it was like you find a cave, you walk in, and there's all these writings on the wall, and it seems like no one's ever been there. Of course, that's not true. And you start unraveling them, and you go, wow, the acupuncture needles were actually a surgery kit for the restoration of the flow of rivers. It wasn't really a point-based system in the way we practice today. It's like completely different. So then there's two choices. Like, some old information is old. For example, I just had cataract surgery, and I'm really glad my surgeon didn't open up a 2,000-year-old book and take out a rusty knife, I'm really glad there was anesthesia and all that stuff, right? So the past can be like that, or it can be like this, which is like it's way ahead of its time. People don't really know what's in there, and it's just this huge archaeological site of amazing information.
And the misunderstanding in this case was due to problems with translation, that people didn't understand the words that were being used to translate these texts, that the language
Yeah.
was different from 2,000 years ago, and so the analogies were different.
So
How did this happen?
that's a really interesting story, as it is. By the way, I should say that the story of the Nei Jing is not set in stone. There are different people who feel differently about it. People who study archaeology, for example, believe that it was written later, but they're not involved in translating the medical theories and stuff, which for me put them earlier. But anyway, I just want to put that out there. That's still a discussion, right? But what seems to have happened is that there was a disruption of transmission. And that was actually the story for most Warring States texts. And that was because of the Qin prescription against literary culture and books and scholars and so forth. You probably heard about the story of throwing the scholars and the books in the pit. Whether or not it was true, it was true probably that if you owned a book, you would be sent to the Great Wall and die as a slave, and your family would be killed. So for a lot of the Warring States books about Confucius, Taoist texts, Nei Jing texts, natural science texts, there were some exceptions for agriculture and things like that. There was a loss of transmission. And a lot of those books were preserved by people memorizing them and passing them down and then reconstituting them in the Han. But if you look at like Chinese, one of its first dictionaries, Shouwen Jiezi, was written in part to help people decipher texts that they'd forgotten how to read. So there was this loss. And then you imagine the Warring States, all these libraries were being broken down and taken over, and texts were being fragmented and so forth. Then there was a multi-decade long reconstruction of texts in the Han Dynasty, where they went through the library of all the things from the Warring States, tried to put them together. And that's where we first see a text that says Nei Jing. But then people wouldn't know that book, and people might have a fragment of it. Then Nanjing is written. What does Nanjing mean? The difficulty, the classic of difficult things we don't understand. We don't know how to read these books, essentially. And so it's like a text about trying to make sense of a book that they don't understand. So that there was a period of time where they were made and what we call the original information, and then a disruption, and then a post-disruption reformation of what the medicine was, which came to be acupuncture points and point action primarily. And a lot of the language is hard to read. It's written in an old script, doesn't have any grammar, like punctuation and things. And the characters meant something different. So this is why we take the approach of text archaeology. And that means you imagine the book is an archaeology site. You don't have any idea what the meaning is. So commonly people will say, well, I know what TCM is. So then when they write something here, they meant what we know in TCM, right? That's clearly like not true. So in archaeology, you're opening a site, you don't know who lived there, you don't know what the culture was, and you start with a blank slate. And then you pick up a character and it's like a pottery shard. And you say, well, let's put it over here on this table and let's get all the other ones that look like that. And let's start making a meaning and let's do it over years. And then let's let the story retell itself. So that's the work we've been doing. And out of that has come this practice of Nei Jing nature-based medicine. And that's part of a 3-part system. So the Nei Jing text is one part, that's our source. The process of text archaeology is another, like what are the ideas? What is it saying? And then Nei Jing nature-based medicine is the medicine that's created from the archaeological findings so you can put it into practice. And those 3 things feed back on each other all the time. So as a new text fragment's discovered, it goes through text archaeology, it alters the treatment techniques, which then alter the understanding of the translation. So all these 3 things actually tie together. Because, medicine is something, we don't just want to do archaeology, we want to help people, right? So if we just do archaeology, that's fine. But our goal as physicians is to help people. So that 3rd part is Nei Jing, nature-based medicine. And that's been amazing. It's brought new models of cancer and healthcare and, new treatments and 7 causes of human illness and all these things that come out of the archaeology site you've never heard of. And they are revolutionary in their scope and their efficacy. So that's where we are. So that's why I always just, invite anybody who has this interest to come and join the archaeology field. Because unlike, say, studying with someone who they have their own system, like Dr. So-and-so's medicine, right? And you go and study with them and you just write down what they say and then you try and do what they say, right? Which it has its own value. But this is something very different. It's like, come join an archaeology site. You can ask any question you want. And if it's a good question, we'll change what we think, because it's like a work in progress. And we're all in there like with our brushes and, I'm learning the same as anybody else. I've been there longer, but come join it because it's amazing. That's
I mean,
amazing.
this sounds amazing. Can you just give an example of what the difference might be? Let's say someone was practicing just your run-of-the-mill TCM, which is not run-of-the-mill. Of course, it's amazing in and of itself. But
Sure.
someone is practicing that, which is already quite codified and structured, treating a patient versus the understanding and the inquisitiveness that would occur through your nature-based medicine process.
Right. And first to say that there are many different ways to treat people and they have different uses at different times. So protocol-based medicine is great for some things. And also if you wanted to train a bunch of people quickly for a public health issue, would be great. There's lots of good things about that and people get help with that all the time. What the Nei Jing says is there's a Shang level of practice and a Su or a common level or a Gong treatment. It doesn't say one's better than the other. Gong is like, I'm skilled at bone setting. Su is what normal people do, like what you do when you go to the doctor. You have a rash, we put a poultice on it, like that. You're treating the form, essentially. Shang means you understand how the universe operates. And you understand how that those motions create a body and how those motions and transformation patterns go offline and form an illness. That's what Shang means. Shang means above, look up at the stars, essentially. So that's kind of the essential approach of Nei Jing medicine. That's also called root and branch. So root is like, how did the unseen patterns of the universe create this illness? What's the medicine? And branch is like, what's the expression of that, essentially? So what would be a difference? So take cancer, for example. A lot of this comes down to stories. I've thought a lot about stories in my life since working here. Stories are different ways of accessing the world, of seeing things in different ways. So for example, in Western medicine, we have the I call it the car mechanic model. Your body's a car, it's made of parts, the parts break down, we replace the parts, essentially. Is that wrong? No, that's great. I just had the cataract. They did a great job. I'm very happy about that. What's the TCM version? Well, the body is somehow related to nature in poetic terms, but we don't know the technical aspects of that so much, but we cut the spirit of it. And then there's a bunch of protocols. If you have this, this, and this, you have that, that, and that, and the herbs are this, this, and this, and the points are that, that, and that, right? So that's another story. That's another way in, which is great for training people quickly and lots of people. But for any profession to survive and thrive, and that's some problem we're having now, like if you look at Western medicine, if I'm a primary care doctor, my work's built on basic research. Or if I'm a cancer doctor, my work is built on genetic research or things like that. So even though I don't know it, there are people that do know it and who are working at the forefront of that science. And that's very important for the health of a tradition, which we don't really have in Chinese medicine in the same way. The source of where we come from is in those old books. The one defining feature of Chinese medicine practice, it's not if you use a needle or an herb, it's whether you can trace what you're doing to that one book. And if you can, you're in Chinese medicine. If you're not, you're a physical therapist or something else, right? But no one really knows what's in that book. That's the problem. So like if you take the idea of cancer, for example, the part-based thing is that, tumors grow and they have genes and things happen and the cancer grows. We don't really know why. And then we cut it out or we irradiate, we take the part out essentially. So the Nei Jing model is there are two dimensions in the world. One is the world we live in with people and things and events. And the other is something we don't see. And it's a world of motion and transformation. There's no motion without transformation, vice versa. So it means there's these swirling patterns of movements. And you might see those movements if you look up at a cloud and see it swirl around, and you see the movements that are pushing the cloud around. By the way, that name of that is called the Tao, that pattern, right? And so that if you want to know about the world, you have to look into the unseen world where the motions and the transformations are. And they all revolve around a central tendency of the cosmos to breathe, which means to expand and contract. And that expansion and contraction moves into different configuration. It folds and unfolds itself, and it moves in and out of physical form. But at the essence, everything in the universe is based on this tendency of the universe to have a heartbeat or to breathe, to expand and contract. And we call those motions yin and yang. So expansion breath is yang, contracting and returning breath is yin. Form, when the breath comes into relationship, it creates relationships around a seed of light. And that seed of light is called Shen or Shenming. And that's something woven into the dimension of the breath. And it illuminates and goes out of illumination. When it illuminates, stable patterns form. When it goes away, the patterns dissolve and reform. People are coherences of breath and light in form. That means that the forms are actually coalescences or slowing down of the patterns of breath. And in stable environments, they create living systems. So your body is actually not a thing. It's a coherence of breath, light, and form, right? And that all illnesses are disturbances in that story of breath, light, and form. That light is at the thing around which everything organizes itself. That's called Shen or Shenming. That arises spontaneously in your heart as because of where it's placed right in the center of things, up and down. And that flows through your blood. The blood are now the channels, but they're originally rivers of blood carrying light, or rivers of light, we would say. When cancer forms, the new model of cancer is that something happens in that breathing system where the rivers of light cannot get to a part of tissue, essentially. But because the nature of the universe is motion and transformation, it keeps transforming, but it does it without the guidance of light, essentially. And so the cancer is tissue that's trying to breathe, but it's lost its governance, and so it's lost its way. So the story is, instead of the cancer being something that comes and attacks you, that needs to be cut out. It's something that's a part of your body that's lost its way and that we need to restore its connection, essentially. And I always tell my patients, like, if you lost your kids at the mall, they don't have malls anymore, but wherever,
We've all been
would
lost at
you
the mall at some point when we were a child.
would you like cut them out or radiate them or poison them? No, you would try and find them and bring them back and say, come with me, and so forth.
Yeah.
So then the medicine becomes, how do we establish the flow of the river of light that comes from the heart back into the area so that the tissue can reform itself upon its original design. So do you see how different that is? Versus in the TCM story, it would be like strengthen the Jung Qi, treat stomach 36, whatever like that,
Right.
which is not anywhere near what you needed to treat something complex like cancer. But that all just comes from looking at an archaeology side of an old book, taking it seriously
Yeah.
without preconception, and see the story it tells.
Let's pause for a moment to extend a big thank you to our sponsor, Handcraft Health. I prescribe a lot of herbal medicine in my practice, and quite frankly, I don't want to spend the overhead keeping hundreds of herbs and supplements on hand. Since the pandemic, I do a lot of telehealth consults and ship patients their prescriptions. Handcraft Health has been my lifesaver. It allows me to have a successful and streamlined practice and saves me money and office space. I am not tech savvy, but the platform is really straightforward for me to write and easy for my patients to pay online and receive their orders at home. It's free for practitioners to open a Handcraft Health account. It's just handcraft.health and only takes a few minutes to sign up. It's one of the easiest choices you'll make to do what you do best. And now, back to our episode. And since we're, talking about oncology, we'll just keep going with that, viewing someone developing cancer within their body that way, as opposed to the trope, we must attack it, we must cut it out. Viewing it that way must give so much more optimism and agency to the patient.
Oh, that changes. I mean, that's one of the main things that I work with in nature-based medicine is the retelling of stories, because there are many that make people sick. And that's one, for example. Most people feel when they get a cancer diagnosis, they've just been invaded by a terrorist.
Yeah.
They can't see, that's moving through the night, that's going to kill them. It's terrifying. Cancer can be terrifying like that. And so as soon as we say, hey, look, this is a part of your body. By the way, you don't want to make up stories. The story I'm telling about light and river, that's based on direct observations of nature and classical texts. It's not just like a fairy tale.
Right. This isn't some woo-woo-y like.
Right, we're not just making up stories. That's not what storytelling means. And so I tell that story. What I said, and then I said, so every time you come in, we're going to bring your cancer in here. We're going to ask it how it's doing, what it needs, and so forth. And when you go to bed every night, think about that. Sending good wishes that we reconnect and so forth like that. Not only does that change the way the person feels and how they experience going through the cancer completely, it changes their immune system and their response to therapy and their side effect profile. And by the way, the cutting it out, that's not bad. That's a different story, right? So often we say if someone has a cancer, actually, we'd like it if you go get that cut out, because it's easier for us to treat a scar than to revert everything all the way back to zero. And so there's a way you can start combining stories in a more artful way, which is our goal, right? Not to be stuck in a little box, but to have all these stories and we can create them in an artful way. But this is all actually taking place against a background of the world we're living in right now. And so that's all about stories too, because what's another story? We're separate from nature. Nature is a resource we use and then we throw it away, right? That's not a very artful story. It's not very true. There's actually, the Nei Jing would tell you there's no distinction between you and nature. You are nature. We are, you have rivers. Nature has rivers. Yeah. You have mountains. Nature has mountains. Yeah. And so the other story we're constantly retelling people when they come in as patients is you are nature, essentially. So what it'll be like, we're going to treat your wrist today. So put your hand here. Can you feel how it feels kind of cold and damp right there? But then if you go up the forearm, it feels warm all of a sudden. And then there's this kind of stuck place right here. Can you feel that? Well, guess what? In the old books, they describe that in your body as like nature. And there were all these rivers, and they were divided into 12 watersheds. And this is one of them. And can you feel the river? It goes all the way there and it gets stuck right there. And all the heat is where it's blocked up above it and it's cold downstream, right? So now I'm going to put the needle in. Do you feel that cold go away? And they go, whoa, and you say that's because you are nature. And then they start retelling the story, because saying a story can make you sick, right? So telling the story you're disconnected from nature, that will make you sick. And that's what we call kind of a collective sickness. So we have those about rhythm, time, place, technology. There's things that are embedded in every healthcare encounter that make people sick that we tend not to address, but they're there, and stories are at the core of all of that. So the other big preciousness of the Nei Jing, it's a way to help us retell our human story. I'm working on this book, and one of the parts I was writing this morning is about one of the goals of life is not to live in a self-referential story. I always give the example, it's like you're on a little boat on the ocean, and you feel like you're the powerful captain of the boat. Like, this is my boat. I'm sailing it around wherever I want to go, right? But you can't see over the side of the boat, and you can't see all the currents in the ocean that are actually moving the boat around, and you can't see the stars. And so it's a very diminished and impoverished life that we're kind of pushing these days when we say it's about us in a certain way. But if you can change your gaze and look up at the stars, look out at the ocean, then you can say, well, not only is there more, but oh my gosh, I'm actually a manifestation of the universe recreating itself upon its original design. I'm part of this fabric, right? So I'm part of the stars, I'm part of the ocean, and we're different coherences of this breath. But how much of a bigger and more joyful, beauty-filled life is that? Then it's all about me and my little boat, So what happened with my work was I originally started and I was just going to look for new ways to treat malaria or something, which, by the way, they're there. But at the same time, the world's been changing so quickly. I have to refocus and use the language and the story of the Nei Jing and the idea of storytelling to actually help us not go extinct.
Yeah. This has some pretty big applications that go beyond our individual malaise that we might be experiencing. And, two thoughts here. The first, as I listen to you telling the way in which you describe our medicine to your patients, it's really beautiful because you are using descriptors that are in nature and everyone can relate to them. They're very universal. And given that they're nature based, they're also seemingly quite calm. And
Oh, I mean, when you tell these stories, people start to cry, really, because also the disconnection it makes us thirsty for what we missed. And, when you tell a story of nature to your patients, it's as if their cells all wake up and go, thank God someone's actually talking about us.
yes.
And when you tell people the story, the nature-based story, not that the other ones aren't helpful, they go, oh, I get it. For example, this happens all the time. We look for something called the inflection point. That's when the breath starts to go offline and they develop an illness narrative in their life, a person does. And often it's something like, when I was 12, I went out in a boat and it was kind of stormy and I was cold and I didn't have a jacket and I fell overboard. And then my dad pulled me back in and I got really cold. And then my dad pulled me back in and said, you'll be fine, And ever since then, and then they say these words, life was never the same again, and that's the inflection point, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And usually they've been telling that story to doctors forever until they give up, right? I think this all started when I fell out of that boat, right? And then you come along and go, well, it did start when you fell out of that boat. That's one of the 7 causes of illness, by the way, cold invasion. And when you make the nature-based narrative, they go, thank God, I get it. And then when you are working with their body as a teaching tool, like I said, put your hand here. Can you feel that? Can you feel the wind coming out of here? They go, oh my God, and that's basically the fundamental story we need to retell to not go extinct. That's one of them. That story about separation from nature is one that will kill us potentially. So this is not like small change stuff.
Well, and this is my second observation, which I'm going to leave it to you to talk about in just a moment here. But so our bigger problem as a human race right now is the isolation and the loneliness and the disconnect from not only our fellow humans. Let's think back to COVID when we were all in our house and nobody was even connected to each other, but then the connection to the planet and nature and everything that we're doing to it. And yes, there is a
Yeah,
very real possibility that we will not be here in another 100 years.
and that stems not from any necessity. Like there's no necessity making us go extinct. We have all we need. If we never
Yeah.
made another discovery in science and technology, we have all we need to live a good
Yeah.
life. It's all about the stories, and the stories about place and time and rhythm and nature and what is a human life. And there again, I think it's easy to get really down on people or be pessimistic. But from my perspective, I call this human beings 3.0, that we're moving through an evolutionary node. And that means first there was our evolutionary origins when we were hunter-gatherers and so forth. And then there was this period since the last ice age called the Holocene, 12,000 years ago, where the climate stabilized and we started to farm and we started to make language, and particularly written language. So that was human being 2.0, right? So in terms of that, and those make stories, and we were not giving the operating manual for that, as human beings. We're not giving a manual on how do you work with stories, right? So it's as if we're in an infancy trying to learn the operating system. If I tell you, you see the world through stories, most people won't even understand that. They'll say, that's not a story. That's absolutely the way the world is.
Yeah.
So we're at a very primitive level. So from that point of view, there's some compassion you can have. If written language came 5,000 years ago, I can almost go on, ancestry.com and find my ancestors to five. It's like just happened. And we're grappling with trying to learn what are stories? How do we retell them? The story that you're separate from nature can kill you. The story that you're not an animal can make you very sick. The story that getting likes on social media will make you happy can make you very unhappy. So stories are like a superpower, but also Achilles heel.
Yeah.
So what we're trying, but so to me, the Nei Jing, its most important thing, it has all these things about cancer, malaria, whatever. The treatments are wonderful.
Yeah.
They are really wonderful. But the deeper thing I'm concerned about is right now, how do we use this to retell stories? And that's why when we teach people, when you work with patients, you are treating them. And by the way, treatment's all about restoring ecology, restoring through rivers. That's the theme of the Nei Jing. But you're also doing this re-education. Oh, can you feel here? Here's a river. Your body, the old text said your body's like nature. Well, it's not like nature. It is nature, actually.
Yeah.
And then it hits people really deeply and profoundly. They get very moved. And then they go out into their community and they start to help retell the story. So that's like a key point of our medicine. And it's poignant to me that at the same time I see schools closing and the profession crumbling a bit, in no small part because we don't understand where our root is. So if you want to grow a garden, you can't do it without the root of the plants, right? But at the same time that's happening, we have the special stuff from these books that is so important right now.
Yeah.
And so that makes this a very unique moment in time.
Well, and I think what you're doing is so important. When we look at philosophical texts and spiritual texts, and you look at someone like Joseph Campbell, or you look at Mircea Eliade, or even like Carl Jung, people have these archetypes, they have myths, and they are very inspiring to the individual. But in my reading of those scholars, and if they're talking about psychology or if they're talking about one's own existence spiritually, this is beyond that, because not only are we talking of one's existence through these stories of nature, but now we're talking about the entire human race, and we're talking about medicine, but we're talking about cosmology. And as you said, this is the time for this information. Someone needs to give you a spotlight on CNN to just broadcast this to everyone. I wish my podcast had 5 million viewers. Because
And,
everyone needs to hear this right now.
change happens organically and slowly, and the river runs it. As we were saying before we started, like our job is not to fix the world, but to be the good farmer. Means like
Yeah.
nature is running things, right? The cosmos is running things. The rivers flow where they want to flow, but sometimes they get obstructed, and a tree falls in the river or something. And our job is not to heal everyone, to fix the world. Our job is to get up at 6 in the morning and be a good farmer. What does that
Yeah.
mean? One of the things about nature-based medicine is everything you need to know is in your garden. I was sitting out in my garden thinking, oh, what a nice garden I'm making, here. And then right away I was like, you idiot, you don't make the garden. You can get the compost, you can make the raised bed, you can put down the drip line. Nature makes the garden.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? There's the part that we have the agency for, which is to wake up every morning and do good work and sleep the good sleep of someone who's done good work.
Yeah.
And then nature makes the rivers. But you have to show up or it doesn't start to work.
That's a good segue to what I wanted to ask you about next, which is showing up and bringing this information to the people who need to hear it. You have a school, you have a program in which you are teaching the Nei Jing nature-based medicine to clinicians, scholars, people who would like to learn more about this. And I'm fascinated. I want people to know about this program and also the way in which you're teaching. Can you talk a little bit about the apricot grove and how you're reframing the study of Chinese medicine, traditional medicine, by adding in this piece of the cosmology and the understandings that you're learning through the text archaeology?
Sure. Ever since I started the text archaeology work, I've been teaching students with the goal of making more text archaeologists and more people to join me in this great work, and also for future teachers, because that's like growing a garden too. You started as a 1 year, now it's a 2 year mentorship. It has 43 study topics. They're 2 weeks each, and they're all from the text archaeology. And people can take that as an online class. We meet every weekend and talk about it. And then we have 3 6-day sessions for people who are wanting to put it more into practice, where we go over hands-on, how do you evaluate a river, things like that. And our goal there is to really train the highest level people we can, who will be the teachers and the researchers of tomorrow. But we also happen to get a lot of people who aren't healthcare practitioners, and they tend to be some of our best students. We have a fair amount of artists and things like that. And they've been great also. And then we're developing this community called Apricot Grove, and a nonprofit with it. We have a program starting on August 24th for the 2 year program. But we've also now wanted to make things more accessible, because that's a pretty big journey,
Mhm.
So now you can also take the first semester of that, which is all about the cosmology and the patterns of space-time motion and things like that, how the universe operates, which is interesting to a lot of people. So they can take that first and then decide to go on if they want to. And then we're trying to build a lot more things for the public,
Yeah.
because we're trying to make something called the Story Project, where we come together communally and retell stories on the basis of nature's design. And there's one called the Tree Project, where people draw themselves as trees, and we have other projects we're working on. But if anybody's interested, I really invite you to come join us in any way. We have open houses and a lot of free material on our site. It's neijingstudies.com. And the next class starts in August.
Yeah, and we'll put that link in our show notes. And for anyone who's listening, this is 2025 right now. So if you catch it by August, it's August 24th, 2025. And then you run this every 2 years. But what an amazing opportunity. So it can be applicable for clinicians, certainly, but even if someone is not a clinician, they can take portions of this program. If someone is a clinician, if they are licensed, do they get CEUs for it also?
Oh, they get like massive amounts of CEUs,
Like 100, like a lot of CEU.
like a million
Yeah.
CEUs.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I'm so inspired just hearing this, because this is information that, once you're graduated, you don't usually talk about this stuff again. You're usually caught in the weeds of what herb should I give my patients, what points will be most effective. And certainly I know you'll be talking about treatment within this program as well, but to begin in the first half of the program by going back to the fundamental universal concepts from which all of these observations were derived. I think that a lot of people are thirsty for this.
It's the point of view of the Nei Jing is you don't learn medicine by learning techniques. I won't say they're nothing, but that's not the medicine. The medicine is learning how to see and move through the world and the cosmos in an entirely different way, such that when you see a patient, you automatically see them in a different way. The techniques are something, if you get that, you can teach in a weekend, But if you don't have, and things in that are things we call long learning issues.
Mm.
Like if I tell you, for example, that the universe is a single breath moving in and out of different configurations, you'll hear it the first time, you'll hear it the second time, but you have to hear it regularly. And we use something called circular learning, meaning we're actually talking about the same ideas from a multitude of vantage points so that you hear it over and over.
Yeah.
And then that transforms not your ideas, but who you are. But that takes like 2 years of hearing that over and over again. Oh, this is the 35th time I've heard it. But then you realize, wow, I really see everything quite differently.
Yeah.
And then when the person shows up in your office, it's not a matter of what syndrome it is. It's like, I just see you in a completely different way and I see what the problem is. But you can't teach that in a weekend, right? It's like going to a monastery and learning how to meditate. It doesn't happen in a weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People they're not memorizing protocols. You're actually looking to change the way they see the world and the way they resonate within that world.
One of our sayings is if you ever treat anybody the same way twice, you're treating yourself, not the person. And that means because the world is so complex, the time that people live in, what day it is, what's going on with them, if you just kind of repeat the same thing,
Yeah.
then you're treating an idea in your head. You're not actually seeing the person in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah. You're training people to be present and really see what is in
We
front
also,
of
and
them in
we
that
also
moment.
say it's questions, not answers. If you say someone has a certain kind of syndrome, it shuts off the inquiry in your mind. Like, oh, there's so and so and they have kidney Qi deficiency. Then your
Yeah.
mind shuts down.
Yeah.
So we ask questions more like, what does healing look like today?
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And I was looking at your website and there are so many different pieces to the programming as well, from nature and the cosmology, and there are some pieces where you're doing calligraphy with the
Oh,
students.
well, we have 2 artists in residence, now maybe 3. And also one of the things we're really interested in developing now is it's great you're like nature, nature-based medicine, but what does it mean when nature is the medicine? So for example, the sun is one of our greatest medicines, but how do you use it as such? Swimming in a certain river is a medicine, but how do you use it as such? So now everywhere we're going, we're trying to be involved more like what's the local river? We're going to get a specialist to talk to us about the river. What's this valley like? How can nature teach us directly?
Mm,
And that's a very exciting phase.
yeah.
Yeah.
So again, it was www.neijingstudies.com
Yep.
for
Yep.
anyone interested. What a great program. I'm very inspired by that. There's nothing else out there like that, to my knowledge.
It's pretty unique that way.
Yeah. When I was looking at your website for your program, there are aspects of myth and the mystical, the cosmological, the sociological, and the pedagogical, different aspects of studying this medicine and studying these universal truths. And within that, you were talking about cultivating gratitude and joy. And I was just wondering, outside of textual analysis, what do you do that brings you joy in these crazy
Oh my
times
God.
that we're in right now?
Well, talking about the flow of the river. The flow of the river really flowed me into a huge area of work. So for like 20 years. So I'm really trying to change my life
Yeah.
from the world of drudgery and hard work to I call it the world of interesting dinner parties.
Great.
We have great teachers now, like they can do all this. I love being out in nature and in my yard and having dinner parties, and I'm just trying to work less.
I mean, I can imagine creating this program, all the scholarly work that you do,
Oh my God.
being a doctor and a clinician and a consultant. Take
Those
some
those
time for
those
yourself, right?
43 study topics of slides. So my goal now is to go to Italy and get dressed like an old Italian man, and then go down to the plaza and work on my book from 9 to 11, and then go do something fun. Have
Oh
dinner
my
party.
gosh, I love it. And I can't wait to read the book. What is the title of the book and what will its topic be?
It's called, well, there's 7 books actually, but the first one is called Reimagining Beauty, Retelling Our Human Story on the Basis of Nature's Design. And it's for the public because I feel like the public is really hurting for this information and they need it now. So we're trying really hard to get it out as fast as we can, but it'll probably be another 8 months to 10 months, something like
Okay.
that. Yeah.
We'll have to have you back on here again to promote the book once
Sure.
it's out.
That'd be great.
Well, you're doing something right because you look so young and healthy, and whatever you're doing, maybe all that time spent analyzing these texts was the thing that was bringing you joy, because clearly your Shen is bright and clear, and you look healthy.
Oh, yeah, I would just keep my mouth shut on that. I'm glad I look that way.
Dr. Neal, thank you so much for being here today. I've loved learning about what you're doing. I myself am going to follow up on it further, and I hope for all of our listeners today, they'll be able to find you, and hopefully there will be a few people who are interested in studying what you're doing under your mentorship. This is really important work that you're doing, and a topic for another podcast in the future will also be how we can apply these to these crazy geopolitical times that we are all experiencing right now. So we'll have you back in the future for that as well.
That would be lovely.
Thank you very much.
Dinner party.
And a dinner party, yes. Please, I'll look forward to that.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here today, and we will look forward to learning more from you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all for today's episode of Elevated Practice. I'd like to express my gratitude to our guests today and always for sharing their wisdom with all our listeners. I hope you were able to take away some insights, practical knowledge, or inspirational ideas that you can apply right away to elevate your own practice. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends and colleagues about Elevated Practice. If you have an idea for an episode or a recommendation for a guest, please respond in the comments or message me, Gretchen Badami, directly through social media. Thank you, and I can't wait for you to hear our next episode.